This tutorial is going to cover different victory conditions. So a few different conditions that you can put into your game is, for example, when all the collectibles are collected and a certain score is achieved, then you can say that the level is beaten. Another way is if you included a timer and the timer ends, maybe the level is done. Another victory condition could be if the player needs to reach a certain checkpoint or a finish line. We're going to deal with the one that is to receive a certain score, because that seems to be the easiest. What we need to do is look in our script where we have put our score, which it should be in the game controller script. So I'm going to go ahead and open that up. And here's our score variable. So now we need to have a check or a condition and check to see if a certain score is reached. If a certain score is reached, then we want to prevent the player from moving and display some type of message that the game is won and maybe a restart button. So that's what we're going to work on today. We have this method for update, which is called once per frame. However, instead of displaying a GUI text message, we're going to work with what's called the method OnGUI. So right before update, we're going to say void OnGUI. Now it's a common error when creating this method that the capitalization is not correct. So again, I stress, make sure you have O is capitalized, N is not, and then GUI is also capitalized. A lot of people type that in incorrectly and can't figure out what's going on, because that actually doesn't present an error. This method is going to be called anytime there needs to be some type of GUI element displayed on the screen. This is different than a GUI text, which works differently than a script. So the first thing we need to do after we've created this method is to put in a check. So we want to say if score is greater than or equal to, and now you can put in some value. So for example, this is how many collectibles that you want the player to collect. So we can make it 6. I have 6 collectibles. You can edit that to whatever you want. Now the reason we make it greater than or equal to is because if for some reason there was a bug in the program and we have more than this, we still want this event to be called. If score is greater than or equal to 6, then we want a message to display. So we're going to call a GUI.box. And as you can see, IntelliSense is giving us a few recommendations on how to type this in. And we're going to do number 3 of 6. So we need to type in some type of rectangle position for our box and then a string. And this is what's going to be displayed inside of the box. For our rectangle position, we're going to say new rect for a new rectangle, and we're basically setting the box dimensions. And we're going to use the third one here for a rectangle. We're going to set up a rectangle that has 4 decimals. Left is going to be the left position, and again we want to think of in viewport coordinates, not game coordinates. Since this is going on the GUI or the user interface, we need to use our coordinates where 0, 0 is the bottom left, 1, 1 is the top right. So for our coordinates here, for now, I'm just going to put in, for the left value of 0, a top value, which is the top of the screen. I'm going to put in a 1. And we do need float values, so 0f, 1f. We need a width value, and for now I'll put in 300, and a height value of, let's do 150. And now we need the string that gets put in. So for now I'm just going to put in you win. We'll save that. We'll check for errors. And let's go ahead and do a play test. I'm going to go around, grab some boxes. As you can see, playtesting could get very lengthy. I mean, it's kind of troublesome to go through and collect all the boxes, especially when you go off the screen like that. So why don't we go ahead and incorporate a cheat for now, but basically a quicker way to play test. So in the update function, we're actually going to test for a key press. If input dot get key down, and now it's looking for the key, and we need to give it a key code. And let's say, since it is a cheat, let's say we press the C key. And this is your basic if statement. So we have if, and then inside here is our check or our condition. So we're saying if the input that the game is receiving is a keyboard key, and then we're picking a class of keys, very similar to what we did in Visual Basic. It was keys or key value. Here it's key code, dot, and then we're picking out the key that we're pressing on the keyboard. So if this key is pressed down, what do we want to happen? We're going to take score, and we're going to increase it by 1. Okay. Likewise, what we did in the collectible controller script, we went ahead and changed the text as well. We can go ahead and do the debug as well. These same lines, when we grab our score text, these same lines are going to be exactly the same, so you can copy and paste them if you want. However, I'm going to go ahead and type them out. So we have a private score text, private GUI text, and we'll call it the same thing, ST. And I deleted our start method, so I'll put that in here. And we want st to be equal to game object dot find, and it's going to be a GUI text. And then in here we're finding the score text. And then down here we can change the text as well. So st.text equals score and score. Alright. We'll go ahead and put in that same debug statement. Now I'm getting kind of lazy. I'm going to go ahead and just copy, come back here, paste. Much quicker. However, this does say GC and we need to change it. We just need the score. Alright, now let's play test. So now we can cheat by just hitting C 6 times. On the 6th time, we do get this message that pops up, and I just wanted to show you now for an example of what the box looks like. We have a gray box and then the text inside of it. Right, we are able to change the texture in there, which we'll get to in a little bit, but right now the position is way off on the top left-hand corner. We want to set it in the middle of the screen. So now I'm going to show you some different commands on how we can do that. So when we come back in here, instead of setting the top left position to 0 and 1, for our left position we can grab screen.width. This is going to be the entire width of the screen, and we're going to divide that by 2. Now, one good thing to note with the way Unity works is that dividing takes up more processing power than multiplying. So dividing by 2 is tougher on the PC than just doing multiplying by a half. So normally when you want to make numbers smaller, multiply by decimals instead of dividing. However, both work, and for this simple game, dividing wouldn't be a big issue. However, if you have a very, very complex game with lots of assets in it, that processing power is very important, especially in mobile devices. So here we have screen.height. We're grabbing the height of the screen, whatever it may be, depending on the resolution, and we're going to multiply by 0.5f. Now that'll put the left side of the box in the middle of the screen and the top side of the box in the middle of the screen. However, since it does have a width and a height, we need to subtract half of this to grab the center of the box. So we need to subtract 150, and we'll subtract 75 from our height. This should put the box directly in the middle of our screen. Go ahead and save that. Come back to Unity and let it compile. No errors. Playtest. Use my cheat. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Voila. The box has shown up directly in the middle of the screen. Notice it's centered. Had we not subtracted those two values, the top left of the box would have been directly in the middle of the screen, and it would have been off center. Alright, so we have a you win message. Notice the text is very, very small. We can change that text very shortly, and I'll show you how to do that. Alright, so we have the you win message, however the player can still move the ball around. Alright, so to prevent movement, we're going to need a variable. So in the player controller script, we're going to create a new variable, and we want it to be public because we're going to grab it from a different script. So we're going to say public, and this one's going to be a Boolean value. So we'll call it bool. Notice it's lowercase b, and we're going to call it allowed to move. And we'll initially set this value to true. Alright, so now under fixed update here, we only want the player to be able to call these lines of code, meaning being able to move when allowed to move is true. So we're going to create an if statement at the top of our fixed update here. If allowed to move, and now you can do two things. You can either say if it's equal to true, and notice our check here is two equal signs, which shows that it's checking this with a value, or if you omit that entirely, this is the same check. So this is saying the same thing. If allowed to move is true, in Visual Basic we had to use a then, but in here it's assumed. So if allowed to move is true, then whatever's inside squiggly brackets is going to be called. So what I'm going to do is go through and indent this out. And I'm going to put another squiggly bracket down here. So we have an if statement entirely contained in a method, which is entirely contained in the script. Right, so you should have three squiggly brackets at the end here. So that means this code is only going to be run if allowed to move is true. I'll save that. Come back into the game controller. And if score is greater than or equal to 6, now we want to grab that variable. And again, we're probably going to come in here and grab something else in the future, so we might as well set up a reference for it. Very similar to what we did with the score text. So again, we'll set up a private game object, and we'll call this player. Actually, we'll call it P. I like to abbreviate my references, that way I don't get it confused with the actual game object. And we'll do private player controller, and I'll call it PC. Alright, so we have our two variables, we just need to create the references for it. So player is gameObject.find, player, and PC equals the player dot get component, and we're trying to get the script that's attached to the player. So player controller. What's nice about IntelliSense is that you saw me typing this in, I just hit tab and it auto-completed it for me. Definitely helpful to prevent errors. Alright, now that we have that player controller script, I'm just going to say PC.allowed-to-move. Notice it pops up in IntelliSense. If that doesn't pop up, then something you did previously is wrong. I'm going to hit tab. So what we want to do is set this to true. Right, notice the one equal sign here is to actually set a value. If you are doing a check like we did in player controller, the double equal signs just sees if that is true or not. Alright, so we're going to save that. And I'm sorry about that. We want this to be false. allowed to move should be false because when you win, we want to prevent player movement. That makes sense. Okay, we'll come back into Unity and check for errors. There are none. Clear that. Save my scene and project quick. And let's try it out. Play. Alright, I can move, so that's how we want it. Hit a box or two. Alright, I'm going to cheat here just to make this go a little quicker. 4, 5, 6. You win. The player sphere is still moving, but I am not pressing it. Alright, eventually inertia or friction will stop the sphere from moving. If we want the player to stop immediately when they hit that square, we need to stop the velocity. If you want to incorporate stopping the sphere right away, you can say player.rigidbody.velocity is equal to new vector3, and we're basically just going to reset all of the values to 0, meaning there's no velocity in any direction on the player. This should work, so when we go into Unity and compile, there's no errors. Play. We can move the sphere around, looks like it's moving okay. I'll put some movement on the sphere, and I'll use my cheats real fast. And when I get to 6, notice the sphere stops moving, and I can no longer move the sphere. We should probably put in a button to allow us to restart at least the level. We'll put in a new element, which is a GUI.button. And again, we need a rectangle for where the button will be displayed. And again, we're going to center it in the screen. So screen.width times 0.5f. Screen.height times 0.5f. And our float width, let's make it 100 for now. We may need to change that, and 40. And our button will say restart. So we did give it a width and a height, so again we need to subtract half of those values to make sure it's centered appropriately. So we'll do 50f and minus 20f. Alright, the f's are for float values. If you noticed in IntelliSense, when you put in a rectangle, we need floats. So make sure all of these numbers are floats. Alright, we'll go back into Unity and compile. No errors. Playtest. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Button is exactly right in the middle. Our button has no functionality now, though. When you click it, we haven't said for it to do anything. So we'll put in some more commands. Now this is the tricky part. I'm going to put in some space here so it's easier to see. So with the button right here, the confusing part is that here we have the button, and this is only to display it. It has no functionality. So if we put this thing inside of an if statement, no pun intended, notice our button statement is the same. I took the semicolon off the end, and I put it inside of pair of parentheses, so we have the one at the end, one here. So if this button is pressed, and now similar to our other if statements, we're going to put it in pair of squiggly brackets. Now we can call the program to do something. So we want application dot. And now what's nice is that this is how you're going to either load a new level, stop the level, quit the game, okay, whichever. So we just need to find the correct one, and we're just going to reload the same level. So we'll do load level, and you can double click one of those as well. And when I put in the parentheses, we have two ways. We can either do an index of the level, or we can do a string name. Now we named our level, at least I named it rollerball, so I'm going to use the same one. And this should reload the game. do one more playtest. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. We have our win message. I cannot move the player. I'll hit restart, and bam, game is reloaded.